Thank you for joining us at Community on Demand. Sometimes we experience interruptions in life that are so traumatic we feel as though we cannot carry on. Today, we will hear from Sam Newton. Sam is a business and management consultant here in the United States and in other countries. He holds a Master of Arts degree in Business Management and is currently working on his Master of Arts degree in Biblical Studies at Grace School of Theology. Sam will be preaching a message he has titled, Life Interrupted. In this world, you will have trouble. This message was recorded during a live Sunday morning service at Community. Let's listen in as Sam begins his message.
So let me start off with this. Have you guys ever been caught up in that torrent of why questions that come from kids? Have you ever been caught up with that? Some of you may relate to the illustration I'm about to give you. But Blake, my late son, was about 3 or 4 years old. This was about 1990. And we're driving down the highway in my little tiny Toyota truck. 5-speed on the floor. It was really cool. He was in his car seat over in the passenger side. And we were driving down the highway about 50, 60 miles an hour, and bam, we hit a big bird. Big bird just right into the windshield, and it was quite loud. It startled both of us. After a few moments, Blake says, in his sweet 3, 4-year-old voice, he said, "Daddy, why did you hit that bird?" And I said, "Son, I couldn't swerve to avoid it. And the bird was just flying too low." After a few moments, he said, "Daddy, why was he flying too low?" You know where I'm going with this. And I said, "Son, I don't know. I guess he was looking for some food." "Daddy, why was he looking for food?" "Son, I don't know. I guess he was hungry. I guess he was hungry." "Daddy, finish it with me. Why was he hungry?" "I don't know, son. I guess he just hasn't been able to find anything to eat." "Daddy, will he be able to find something now?" And this is when my patience had run out. This is when I got pretty frustrated. And I lost the Father of the Year award with this response. I said, "I doubt it. He's probably dead." So, just like the many why questions Blake was asking that day, whenever we as adults experience trauma, whenever we as adults experience life interrupted, we oftentimes ask the why questions. Why? Why me? Why did this happen? You know, we experience a lot of life interruptions in life. Loss of a parent, loss of a sibling, loss of a child, divorce, loss of a job. There's an infinite number of life interruptions. An infinite number, and those are just a few of them. We ask the questions of why so we can try to get information to help us make sense of the world, to help us understand what's going on, and to help us understand how we can move forward. We ask questions, and sometime, in my case, which I'm going to share with you, I demanded answers to why. No one is immune to life interrupted. If you haven't experienced a life interrupted so far, congratulations. But John records Jesus in 1633 telling his 11 disciples on the eve of his crucifixion, just the night before his life was interrupted, "In this world you will have trouble." James tells us in 1:2, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials." Not if, it's when. And it's just a matter of when. It's pretty clear there are two kinds of people in this world. Those who have experienced a life interrupted and those who will experience a life interrupted. I lost both of my parents to cancer in 1991. My first wife and I lost her mom and sister-in-law in a horrible, horrible head-on collision in 1990 in Spring, Texas, just south of here on 2978, or Kirkendall. Yeah, one of those roads. Marlo and I lost her mom and her dad in 2021, 2008. And we also lost 2 of Marlo's brothers in 2016 and 2018. My family has had their fair share of life interrupted, but never compared to what I experienced in 2010. And I'm about to tell you all a story. But before I do, I want to recognize a couple of people and honor a couple of people. I'm going to tell you a story about my son, Blake. But I want to recognize and honor his mom here today. And his sister here today. Thanks, guys, for being here. It means a lot to me. Most of you are aware of this story. Thanks, Leslie. Most of you are aware of this story, but some of you who don't know, let me give you a little bit of background. My son, Blake, graduated from high school in 2005. Early on, when he was growing up, it became obvious he was going to have an irresistible, just bigger-than-life, over-the-top personality. He loved competitive sports. He played varsity football. He ran track, played a little basketball. He was big into martial arts. I always said, when I grow up, I want to be like my son. He was my hero. We were extremely close. His graduation being on the heels of 9/11, he wanted to serve his country. He enlisted in the Army infantry with a letter and signed a letter of intent to go into Special Forces. He was a tough kid, and he grew into an even tougher young man. After serving nearly 5 years in the Army infantry and recon sniper units, he received a medical discharge because he broke the Liz Frank bone in his left foot. After serving a number of combat engagements, he discharged from the Army in March of 2009. But he lost his final battle at home. He suffered from a moderate to severe case of PTSD, and he took his own life 9 months later on January 21st, 2010. Just 2.5 weeks ago marked the 15th anniversary of that event. As you can imagine, this is when my whys began. This is when I started looking for answers. This is when I started demanding answers. You know, there's an infinite number of why questions that we can ask when we are dealing with trauma such as that. But I want you to know, and this is the point I want you to leave here with today. How we frame these questions will determine if we are inviting God to be part of our healing process or not. So critical. I want to talk about some of these questions. In fact, I want to talk about 3 questions that we might ask with a traumatic event. I'm just going to use my son's situation as background. And then I want to discuss 3 ways where we can find strength to invite God into our lives to help us with that healing process. The first why that I want to talk about is the worst why. By far the worst why. And it may sound something like this. God, why did you do this to my son? Why did you do this to my son? You know, I feel really sorry for people who ask that question, because you got to be pretty angry to blame something like that on God. You got to be pretty angry to do that. But you know, unfortunately, many folks think that way. Many folks think that way. I would actually have people come up to me and say, it wasn't Blake's fault. It was in God's plan. Yeah. I would actually have people come to me in church, no less, and say, hand me a little wadded up piece of scripture, folded up piece of scripture, and say, this will help, read this. This will help you understand why Blake made the decision he did that night. And I would just say, no, nothing can explain it away that easy. It's impossible. You know, I know these folks did this with their best intentions to ease my pain, but I'll be real honest with you. It just made it worse. It just made it worse. And I would politely and try to be as Christianly, because it was in church, Christianly just wad the paper up and walk over to the trash can and just throw it away. You know, I don't view God that way. I never have. That is, that God, before time, intentionally designed a world, a blueprint, if you will. Dr. Anderson, I think, has used the term spreadsheet theology. I use the term blueprint theology. I just can't imagine God designing a blueprint world that includes everything that happens everything that happens, everything that goes on in the world. It just doesn't make sense to me. I've always understood my God to be a loving, caring, compassionate Father, and that He would never intentionally take the life of my son. Blaming God for my son's death would have been a really easy thing to do. It would have been real easy. It wasn't Blake. It was God. It's God's fault. That just never resonated with me. It just didn't make any sense with me. And one time, my good friend Kai sitting here one night, I was explaining to Kai these people that would come up to me and say, it's God's fault. It's not Blake's fault. And Kai, figuratively, if not literally, it may have been literally, he grabbed me by the neck and said, God didn't do this to your son. And that was an interesting intervention. Thank you, Kai, for that. The second why is a little bit better. It allows a little bit more wiggle room for God to be part of the healing process. And that question may sound like this. And this is a question I did ask. God, why did you allow this to happen to my son? Now, it's almost impossible for me to explain the pain and the anger that I felt after Blake's death. I mean, after all, I was the model Christian. I was leading 2 small groups. I was co-leading our men's ministry. I was co-leading our single adults ministry at the church I'm serving in. I went to church almost every Sunday. How dare God allow this to happen to my son? I deserved better. Folks, these are just some things going through my mind. Once I got so angry, I beat a picnic table with a metal chair, MMA style. Boom, boom, boom. I got no answers from that, but I did get a severely strained back in the process. On another time, I yelled and screamed at God so much that I was hoarse for several days after that. Thank goodness no one was there. I think Marla would have called 911, I think, but that's how much pain I was going through. Some people wonder if it's okay to be angry with God. Dr. Anderson touched on it in last week's message. Yeah, I think it's okay to be angry. He already knows you are. So why not just be honest and reveal your honest, genuine heart with Him? I think God smiled down on me when I was expressing my anger and frustration to Him, because I'm acknowledging that He exists. And He's also saying, Sam, just keep looking towards me. Keep looking towards me. You're wanting the answers on your terms. I haven't yet given you the answers on my terms. And He was patient with me. He was just glad I wasn't turning my frustration over to some other means of coping. In all of the silence, the more I yelled, the more I demanded answers, the more questions I asked, the longer and the louder the silence seemed to get. And then one point I heard this: my grace is sufficient for you. Wasn't that what God said to Paul, who was going through his horrible times? Yeah. Well, this question, why did you allow this to happen, may remove God from the moral monster category that I discussed in the first one. It still leaves Him as a compassionless, powerless, maybe a mean God. And I was frustrated with that. I struggle with that. While this second question allows a little more room for God than the first question, it still didn't openly invite Him to help me heal through the process. The third why. Third why is framed a little bit differently. And again, using my experience only as an example, it may sound like this: Father, why did this happen? What am I supposed to do with this? Who exactly are you in this? How do I find you? How do I see you? How do I glorify you with this experience? Now, this is opening up God to be a wonderful healing part of your life. About 6 months after Blake's death, went on a backpacking trip with a group of men from church. The guy who led that backpacking trip is sitting right here. I'll keep him anonymous, but I'll ask Keith to raise his hand. Yeah. Keith was a real blessing to me. Both Kai and Keith both were real blessings to me during this time. I was 6 months later, I was still just crushed with pain. I'll be real honest with you. I was crushed with pain. And we got up to the first place that we camped, Lower Slate Lake, I think. And Keith said, "Hey, get a cigar out of your backpack. Let's go up on the mountain. Let's smoke a cigar." I knew what he wanted to talk about. I didn't want to talk about it, but I knew what he wanted to talk about. So we both got our cigars and we hiked up to the side of the mountain. We found this big boulder that we kind of sat back on, overlooking this beautiful Lower Slate Lake. And the tension was palpable for me. And Keith said the right things. He said, "I can't imagine what you're going through. I don't know how you are making it through this." He said the right things. I couldn't respond because it was just too raw, too real still 6 months later. And then he said this. He said, "If Blake were here right now, what would he say to you?" And it came crystal clear just like that. I said, my son would say, "Hang in there, Pops. Hang in there." That was a turning point for me because I left there going, why am I supposed to hang in there? Is there a reason? Maybe there's a reason. So I began to ask the question, God, this is a big experience you put me through. Why? Why? What am I supposed to do with this experiment? And I'm telling you, I'm going to be real honest with you. I've had the wonderful opportunity and the blessing to discuss my Blake story with a number of people over the years, videos. I've factored it into my management consulting. I speak to individuals and to small groups. Just this past Wednesday night, I met with a group of men. We are, I think the technical term is suicide loss survivors, if there's a medical term for it. We are fathers who've lost their sons. About 4 or 5 years ago, I got a call from one of the 3 guys, and he said, "Sam, we've all lost our sons, and we're struggling. We're looking for answers. We can't find the answers. And we want to know if you would join us. We know you lost your son 10 years earlier. We know you're a lot farther along than we are. Would you meet with us?" And I said, "I'd be happy to." So I've been meeting with those guys on a fairly regular basis, walking them through their process, helping them find some answers to their why questions. And I am happy. I know it sounds odd, but I'm happy. But there's going to be a 5th guy joining our little group the next time we meet. I've been blessed by God to have the opportunity to share Blake's story and share God in all of it. So I want to talk about 3 ways that we can prepare ourselves so that we are more likely to ask the right question. What do we need to do to prepare ourselves so when we do encounter a life experience, a life interruption, that we ask the right questions? 3 things. Number 1, live in community. Live in community. I cannot imagine going through what I went through without a community of believers to walk alongside me, supporting me, loving me, and praying for me along the way. Marla and I were leading and hosting a single adult small group at the time. And we consistently had 20 to 30 people show up each night. I was co-leading a men's small group. Blake passed away on a Thursday night. Friday morning at 10 a.m., there were no less than 40 people in my home, loving and caring for us. Some people going through a tragedy like this say, where is God in all this? My goodness. I saw God. God manifested himself so beautifully in those 40 people. You know, and living in community is so important. Living in community is a double-edged sword. While people care for you, and you know what we've experienced in the last 4 weeks is because we've been living at Community Church. It's a double-edged sword. While people can serve me, it gives you the opportunity to get to people and to know people and to relate to people so that you can, in turn, serve them. And there's no better picker-upper in this world than to serve somebody less fortunate than you. I'm going to take a little sidebar for a second. And I want to talk about men. After Blake's death, I was asking some pretty tough questions. I was pretty direct in the way I asked them. Some of the men in my men's small group gathered around me in support. After a while, we ended up forming a unique small group. And some of you may be offended by this. If you are, let me ask you for forgiveness in advance. But the name of that small group was Holy Smokes, Men of the Leaf. We had coffee cups. Holy Smokes, Men of the Leaf. And on this is a quote by Dr. Charles Spurgeon. He says, "When I have found intense pain relieved, a weary brain soothed, a calm, refreshing sleep obtained by a cigar." I can't believe I'm reading this to you guys. I mean, Dan, is this okay? "I have left grateful to God and have blessed His name." That's Charles Spurgeon. But we would get together on a regular basis. We'd smoke cigars and we'd solve all the world's problems. It soon became pretty obvious that I wasn't the only man that had tough questions in this group. We had a young man named Danny. He came to our group on a regular basis. Both of you guys might remember this story. By the way, here's three alumni of the Holy Smokes group right here. So, Danny, one night, we were about 30 minutes into whatever we were studying, and Danny just kind of said, "I got to talk about something, guys. I'm really hurting. This morning before I left for work, my wife asked me for a divorce." And so, whatever we were studying, we just closed the book and we just set it to the side. And for the next 6 to 8 weeks, we walked alongside Danny, loving on him, supporting him, just being with him, praying with him, giving him coaching, counseling, advice. And to this day, Danny and his wife are still happily married. Praise God. Men, when I'm talking about living in community, men need a safe space to meet. Men process the world, if you haven't figured this out. They process the world a little bit differently than women do. And men respond a little bit differently to the loving touch of the feminine gender than men do, than they typically do, okay? Let me give you an example of this. It was about 4 or 5 days. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because this is a cute story. At least that's what I've been told. About 4 or 5 days after Blake passed, I was hurt. I was still crushed with pain and emotion. And I was sitting in the chair in our house, and my beautiful wife, you know her as a loving, kind, sweet, compassionate, soft, tender person. She was hurting so bad for me. She sat on the ottoman just in front of the chair, and she took my face like this. Guys, if I mess up this mic, you're going to need to come fix it for me. But she took my face like this in her hands, and she said, "What do you need from me?" And you all know me as to be loving, sweet, compassionate, kind too, right? Right? She said, "Babe, what do you need from me?" And I said, "I need you to get out of my face." Men respond differently to traumas, and they need a safe space to vent and ask the tough questions. Living in community has been a blessing. It's been a blessing for me. I don't know what I would have done without it. Number 2, discipleship. To me, the word discipleship is me learning about Him so I can become more like Him. That's what discipleship is, simply put. About 5 years ago, Marlo and I took a class at Grace School of Theology. It was a nice class, night class. It was an overview of hermeneutics taught by Dr. Mark Haywood. It was a great class. Hermeneutics, by the way, is just a big fancy word that says the art and science of interpreting the Bible. In the class, I got a really great tidbit piece of wisdom from Dr. Haywood, and it sounds like this. It sounds like this. The most important thing you think about every day is what you think about when you think about God. I don't know where Dr. Haywood got this, but it resonated with me. I think about this phrase all the time. The most important thing you can think about every day is what you think about when you think about God. It's so important, it's not up here on the screen. I was going to have you say it along with me, but it's not there. The most important thing you can think about every day is what you think about when you think about God. No truer words have ever been spoken. Discipleship is a lifelong pursuit. It doesn't stop when you finish that 1-year reading plan of the Bible. It doesn't stop when you get that little diploma, that little certificate. It's a daily endeavor, and it lasts a lifetime. It's a lifelong pursuit of learning who He is. And I've been kicking around in the church world pretty consistently for almost my whole life. But for the past 35 years, more intentionally in serving and teaching and leading. But for the past 15 years, since the death of my son, I've been on a personal journey to learn more and more about who He is. And this led me to enroll at Grace School of Theology. And it's been a wonderful blessing for me so far. When I was contemplating going back to school at the ripe young age of 64, I came across Philippians 1:9. Now, it probably would take 3 or 4 sermons to really unpack the truth that's found in Philippians 1:9. And it's up there. That's cool. But I want to point out just one feature to you. The New Testament Greek word, let me read it out loud to you. And this I pray, that your love may abound still more and more in real knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve the things that are excellent. It's important for us to understand what this phrase, real knowledge, means. In the New Testament, the Greek word in the New Testament for knowledge is gnosko, which means to know on a broad or progressive sense. But in this passage, Paul, to the Philippians, uses the Greek word epignosko. The prefix epi intensifies the form of gnosko. It intensifies the form of the word know. It implies a deeper, more precise, more personal, more intimate knowledge of Him. There's a reason he uses epignosko and not gnosko. We should all be striving for epignosko. I'm not saying you need to become students at Grace School of Theology, but if anybody does enroll as a result of my sermon, please refer it, so maybe I get an extra point or two from my next class with Dr. Anderson. You know, we're not all called to be scholars, but we are all called to be disciples. What I want to encourage each of you to do is to grow in your epignosko of God in whatever way that works best for you. Dr. Alec Montyer, in his book Covenant Foundation, says this: we grow in proportion as we know. To grow as a Christian is to grow in one's grasp of the truth in breadth and depth. Remember the passage that Dan shared with us 2 weeks ago, Romans 12:2? And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is. We renew our minds when we spend time in the Word. Developing a greater understanding of who God is and what His will is will help you get through a life interrupted. Number 3, fellowship with Him. I'm not talking about the community aspect of fellowship, but I'm referring to our personal walk, our personal fellowship with Him. Here's the formula. Continued intimate fellowship strengthens the trust you have in Him. Strengthened trust builds faith. Strengthened faith will in turn give you the confidence to turn your life's challenges over to Him, so you don't have to plow through them on your own. Let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. Here is the CEO of Harvesters Ministries, Fanny Stephen Lutz. I'm Facebook friends with him. I got to read his book a couple of years ago in one of my classes at Grace School of Theology and just fell in love with the author. I found him on Facebook. I'm friends with him. I know who he is. He doesn't have a clue who I am. He is the CEO of Harvesters Ministries, and they've planted over 100,000 churches since the year 2000. About 4 months ago, he announced he has been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Yeah. Each week he posts 10 to 15 minute videos on Facebook and YouTube describing his ongoing battle with this horrible, virtually incurable disease, all the while demonstrating his continued beautiful faith in the Father. In a quote from a recent video, he says this: "A diagnosis like this brings you face to face with God in ways you never expected or experienced. It has deepened my prayer life, increased my dependence upon Him, and reminded me of His promises." Folks, that's a beautiful faith. If Lute's example doesn't resonate with you, if it's not personal enough for you, how about this guy? How about this young lady in red here? For those of you who don't know, the picture on the left is Dr. Kenny Hodges and his beautiful family. Dr. Kenny Hodges is a pastor here, and he's an elder here. Wonderful, sweetest man in the world. About 4 years ago, he was diagnosed with cancer. He's been bravely fighting that ever since. He's not here personally, but I know he's watching because he told me he would be. He has become a mentor to me, just a wonderful guy. The lady on the picture on the right is she's dressed in red. That's Arthi Bustron. We all know her. 5 years ago, she was diagnosed with a debilitating, horrible neurological disorder with no cure, very rare. That's her husband with her, Dr. Rich Bustron. He is also a pastor at this church. God has given us some beautiful, beautiful examples of people that have lived in community, discipleship, and intimate fellowship with walk. And it is giving them the opportunity to demonstrate God's glory in the walk that they're going through while still demonstrating such beautiful faith. Let me finish with this. When life interrupted happens to you, ask questions that will invite God into your heart, that will allow you to heal. Don't box Him out. Remember, this important message from Romans 8:18 was so comforting to me throughout my struggles. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Amen for that. I love reading. I read constantly. I read nonstop. Almost all nonfiction books and articles. I seldom ever turn on the TV unless the Dallas Cowboys are playing. So, which means I'll be doing a lot of reading this afternoon. The older I get, the more I realize how much about God I still don't know. When I'm reading and I start getting close to the end of a chapter, I will, and I don't know why I do this. I don't know if any of you do this, but I'll sneak ahead, look at the title of the next chapter. I don't know why I do that. You're ADHD like me, Maria. I look ahead and I see a title and I get so excited. I can't wait to finish the chapter I'm on so I can get on to the new chapter. But sometimes I look at the title of that next chapter and I scratch my head and I'm going, where in the world is this book going? I want you to look at your life as a book with a number of chapters. To that end, love your kids, love your spouse, love your family, love your friends as often as you can. Live in community, engage in discipleship, and fellowship with Him in some way each and every day. Why? In life, we can't see the future. What I'm saying is, you never know what the title of your next chapter will be. So be prepared.
On behalf of Pastor Dan and the folks at Community, thank you for joining us today at Community on Demand. Feel free to share this link with others, and please know you are always welcome to be our guest during a live service any Sunday morning at our campus in The Woodlands, Texas. For more information, just click on the link www.cbcwoodlands.org. I hope you will again join us at Community on Demand.